Greetings. This is The World by 2030 with Gerd Leonhard and Anton Musgrave. We're talking about the future today, about artificial intelligence and regulation. You may have noticed in the last couple of months, there have been countless calls to regulate AI. There have been open letters left and right and center, like 4 or 5 of them, saying that we should not proceed with AI until we decide what the standards are, whether we need to regulate. The UN is calling for things, and the World Economic Forum is calling for things, and the Future of Life Institute. The story goes on, okay? Yeah. So the question I have and that we should debate is, do we need to regulate AI? Do we need to put stringent measures into place? Do we need a treaty? Do we need a new international atomic agency for AI, as people have been saying? Yeah. I signed the letter from the Future of Life Institute along with my friend Elon, just kidding, but he was there as well. He signed pretty much everything else also, and Jeffrey Hinton and others. So the question is, do we need to regulate, and what's your take?
I think the answer is we absolutely do, Gerd. There's no doubt that the early signs of the impact, the reach, the risk, if you like, and the scale of opportunity of artificial intelligence is such that it warrants some kind of regulatory oversight. The challenge we have, however, is that regulatory frameworks, regulations are developed by bureaucrats sitting in huge big buildings, trying to understand exactly how to define what can and can't happen, what should and shouldn't be used for, etc. I think the speed of the development of artificial intelligence is such that we need to rather think about regulatory values, regulatory principles, high-level aims and objectives that will trap the bad stuff and yet catalyze or enable the good stuff. And so how do we achieve that new shift in thinking about regulation in any industry for that matter, not only in artificial intelligence? So it's the speed with which the technology is developing that is going to really mitigate against effective regulation, because we're going to look for the perfect answer. That doesn't exist. So how do we step in quickly with some high-level parameters that will guide and shape and form the thinking, if you like, and then develop that as we go along? Much like rapid innovation. Innovate, fail if you need to, change, adapt, iterate, and carry on. So we can't wait for the day of perfect final regulation. That day is going to be a long way out, I suspect.
Well, I think this is it's a difficult issue because regulating atomic energy is one thing. We have clear-cut measures, we have clear-cut issues, we have plutonium, we have facilities, and so AI is different. We have harmless AI, intelligent assistant, like a bot giving advice to travelers and so on, and then we have more generally intelligent AI, and then we have super intelligence that is the declared goal of some of these organizations. And I think what we need to look at is all of those departments, for example, with intelligent assistants, when we're automating things, what are the side effects of automation? Yeah. And do we need standards? And do we need automation taxes? And do we need supervision of that? And the next thing is, on the next level, if the goal is to create general intelligence, which is generally defined as machines that can do more than what we can, and that may become uncontrollable, singularity, I think we need to figure out guidelines like we do with nuclear bombs in a way, because this is truly existential, but it's different than the automation piece. Right?
Yeah, but I think that, I agree with you in principle. The challenge, however, is who's going to frame that regulation. So right now we're looking at the leaders of the AI companies who are seeking commercial value from their invention, right? Are they the right people? On the other hand, we think regulators, United Nations, which is the body. And the problem is that, in business, for example, so few CEOs who are making massive capital budget allocations every year, developing business strategy, really don't understand the technology themselves. So will the regulators understand it enough? Can we trust the AI guys that do understand it?
Well, I've mentioned many times in my work that I think we should have like a driver's license for the future for politicians. And we need to force politicians and CEOs and officials and even mayors of cities is to look at those issues and say, do I really get it? Because there's the economic pressure of saying, if we do this, we can go times 10x of GDP, and that's like, wow, 10x GDP, everybody has to go for that, right? And that is kind of the arms race moment right now. So if that is being pursued and nothing else is being done, then we're going to 10x the problems or 100x the problems as well. And so the public pitch on, how do we get this forward into public discussion without creating more fear. You know, that is, I think, crucial. This is, of course, why we're doing the show. This is why I make my films. This is why we talk about the good future, because this topic needs to be explained in all detail. Without fear-mongering. You know, we're not going to go to hell and Space Odyssey 2001 anytime soon, but, you know, there is a leaping moment that we're going through right now. In principle, we could say that maybe in 5 years we can get to that point where we have a generally intelligent machine.
Sure.
Or maybe if it's 10 years, but it's not going to be 100 years. So we do need to look at this.
But we need to make some of those big assumptions right now. I mean, for me, the genie is out of the bottle, Gerd. Facebook has released a lot of its source code in artificial general intelligence, right, or generative AI already. So how do we stop it? How do we slow it down? So it's no longer just the big five playing with artificial intelligence. Now you've got hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people playing with it, developing it. Can you actually retrofit the regulation that, you know, in an industry that's developing at such rapid pace? So maybe we need to take some high-level positions on 5 and 10-year projections on what might be, and try and regulate the principles of that upfront right now in the next 3 months.
Well, it's a question of relationship. You know, we have roughly over $1 trillion now already invested in artificial intelligence. And when we look at compliance and accountability and what's called alignment of human values, and, you know, there's like less than 1% invested in this, right? So what we need to do is we need to invest equally in those two things, and maybe not entirely equally, but close to that, so that we can actually harness the benefit. And I think having an international agency like the IAEA, the Atomic Agency, that is, I think, is a good plan, along with the idea of what the elders, called the elders, there's an organization called the elders, where we have like a Humanity Future Council, you know, Council of the Wise People. That's not necessarily UN or UNESCO or any of that, but it's just people who know how to put things right.
But to do that, we need to bring the whole world together to the same table. And remember, again, contextually, we're asking for this high-level, very important alignment with trust as a consequence in a very polarized geopolitical world, where some fundamental shifts are taking place, whether we like them or not. That's a stated fact. It's an acknowledged fact. So how do we bring those people, the North Koreas of the world, who are probably quite far ahead in artificial intelligence, how do we bring them, the massive powers, the China, Russia, India, United States, Europe, etc., together around the table, around this common ambition? It's interesting, it might be the one thing that we can all agree on, which builds trust in the nations that can then be applied elsewhere.
Yeah, I think there's a trigger moment right now that's happening where even in China, people are saying, you know, we need to figure out how we do this together. It can be, you know, Chinese against Americans, against Russians, against Indians, against Europeans, you know, because then we end up in a really bad place. I wouldn't be that sure about Iran or North Korea or Russia at the moment about those collaboration. But I think China and the US, I think, is probably more likely to get on the same page, especially because we're looking at, you know, it's an interesting angle. If you're looking at China, they have way more submissions for papers and research than America. But Americans own all the chips.
And many of the patents.
With the time and the money, right? They have like 10x the money put into this than Chinese have. But in the end, you know, this collaboration of making sure that general intelligence goes well in the sense of controlling it, that is, I think, possible between China and the US and Europe and maybe India. Russia right now, who knows, big wild card, right? But basically, I think it will force us to come to the point and say, well, we figured this out with nuclear bombs. Kind of, and it's still working. We figured it out with genetic engineering. China was very much adamant about controlling that. Do I trust that China can do this together? I think we can have hopes for that to happen. It's not impossible, but it will be painful. However, I think it's all going to happen in the next 2 years. So I think we're going to get there very quickly.
For me, the challenge also is for individual business leaders that are faced daily now with practical questions. Can I use ChatGPT, for example? We need to ask ourselves, as we apply it today, not waiting for 2-year regulation to take place, how do we, in our realm and domain, take responsibility for making sure we do it the right way? Can we answer the question, am I doing the right thing? Am I adding real value? Am I being selfish and greedy? Am I recognizing my client's personal rights in this? How am I protecting the data? So that already we start at a practical level in our businesses right now, anticipating a more controlling regulatory framework aimed at the best thing for humanity, not necessarily the best thing only for my bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important position for us to take.
Yeah, I think the big challenge there really is that we had regulations so far that was primarily about economics or dangers. You know? It wasn't about a larger purpose. That's also very hard to define. You know? So if we're looking at society going away from GDP growth and profit and all that stuff and moving towards people, planet, purpose and those kind of scenarios, that's much harder to regulate because it's kind of a soft approach. You know, it's a larger paradigm shift.
It's harder in some ways. If you're trying to regulate exactly what you may and may not do, it's incredibly hard, maybe impossible.
Right.
But if you're trying to establish norms and principles for the better of everyone in our ecosystem, then I think it's easy. You remember Google, do no bad, right? Maybe we need to adopt the same very simple phrase line in all of our businesses. Are we doing good or potentially bad? And then start regulating ourselves in advance of the big bang publication.
Yeah, I think this is Google makes a very good example. You know that this is of course the mantra of Sergey and Larry and all people who started Google. But the mantra is one thing, and the reality of actually getting it across and sticking with it is another thing. And then you get sucked into things that weren't originally part of the plan, and before you know it, Google supports the Defense Department.
That's
you know?
right.
And actually, there are Defense Department people on the board of Google, so let's not forget about that. You know? So I think when we talk about regulating AI, we need to have a larger level. You know, so I picture that as being one sort of
overarching
philosophical
framework.
thing and one practical thing, you know. And the practical thing would have to be a new agency, I think, in my view, because old agencies would end up being fragmented and all of those things. But it's going to be a long process. Let's wrap up the show. It was great to be with you guys, and thanks very much for tuning in.